Welcome to The Courage Effect. I'm Suzanne Weller, and this is a show about growth and unleashing what's possible. You will hear inspiring stories about what courage looks like, how we navigate what's getting in our way, and the opportunities that surface when we choose courage over comfort. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. It is Suzanne, and I'm so glad that you are here listening to The Courage Effect. The conversation today is around mentoring and developmental networks. My guest is somebody who specializes in this area. Her name is Lisa Z. Fain. And what I so appreciate about this conversation is how important relationships are in our world to help us to learn, to help us to develop, whether it's officially as a mentor, whether it's a larger relationship in our lives, in our professional careers, whether you're a mentee, a mentor, a sponsor, a manager, a trainer. There's so many different ways in which we can learn from each other. She talks about how developmental relationships really can work one-on-one and in groups, and they're not one size fits all. They're not limited to being people that are directly within the same hierarchy of an organization. And it doesn't mean that one is necessarily more senior than another. I really appreciate so much of the perspective that she brings to how we intentionally learn from the people that we have relationships with, and her thoughts on how organizations can do that intentionally. They can build structures so that it's not just about people meeting and greeting. That can be great to have and build relationships, but how do we really learn from each other? Successful mentoring is really about having some structure in place and ensuring that there are clear expectations and that both people are learning and gaining from the experience. So let me tell you a little bit about Lisa before I welcome her into this conversation. Lisa Z. Fain is a global speaker, TEDx presenter, and CEO of the Center for Mentoring Excellence. A recognized expert in mentoring as a tool to transform careers and workplaces, she helps organizations build inclusive, high-impact cultures. Lisa is also an executive coach and former employment attorney, known for her practical, energizing approach. She's the co-author of Bridging Differences for Better Mentoring and the third edition of The Mentor's Guide. Lisa challenges us to invite other people into our world intentionally, to learn new things, for people to challenge our ideas, give us new ways of thinking, because we cannot succeed on our own. We need other people to help us to realize what we are capable of and what's capable in the broader world around us. So thank you, Lisa, for reminding me of not only the importance of learning, but of the importance of cultivating learning relationships in my life forever, because that's one thing that I never want to do. I never want to stop learning. Hi, Lisa. It's great to have you here. Welcome to The Courage Effect.
I'm so excited to be here, Suzanne. Thanks for having me.
So I have watched your TEDx talk a few times, and I am so interested in having this conversation about courage and developmental networks, because I feel like that's a phrase that we don't hear a lot is, first of all, developmental networks and the idea of where courage comes into play. So I'd love for you to take us from there.
Wonderful. I'd love to. So let me start by saying the term developmental networks isn't mine. It's one that was developed by colleagues in the mentoring field, Kathy Cram and Monica Higgins, to really indicate these intentional learning relationships, constellations of relationships, both professionally and personally, that are designed to help you grow in various ways. And they can be any kind of learning relationship. So it could be a one-on-one mentoring relationship. It could be a peer relationship. It could be a coaching relationship. It could be a long-term mentoring relationship or a mentoring moment or a mentoring conversation. But it's about people identifying their own needs, their own learning needs, and then intentionally creating relationships that serve those needs. And it's not just about taking, right? There's a mutuality and a reciprocity, a giving and a taking in those developmental networks that's enriching not just for the learner, but actually that helps everybody be a learner and enriches and lifts everybody.
I love that you're talking about the reciprocity, because I feel like that's one of the things that people don't always do and that makes people so uncomfortable about even starting the relationship, because they feel that they're coming from a place of selfishness.
Yeah, especially folks who are really junior in their career. Often I'll talk to students or recent graduates from graduate school or what have you, and they say, I want to intentionally create these developmental networks, but it just feels so impositional, right? It feels so needy and so selfish. What do I have to add? And I think, what's really important is to recognize that in any kind of developmental relationship, particularly a mentoring relationship, what the data shows is that there is this mutuality, there is this reciprocity, and that even by engaging in the developmental process, that mentors gain as much as mentees gain. So it's really reframing that it's not just a take. There is this idea of a give, even for just holding space for learning and for having somebody share their experience.
I definitely want to talk about that more, and I want to go back to the courage question. So, for you, where do you see courage coming into developmental networks?
Well, I think it's the courage of being the first mover. I'd say two things, really: the courage of being the first mover, and the courage to ask for what you need, and maybe even also the courage to reflect, to take the time to reflect on what you need, and to make that a priority. You know, I think, particularly as women, we're bad at this, in terms of kind of giving and appeasing and pleasing and all of the things. And actually there's a beauty in that too. I'm not diminishing that desire, but I do think along with it, is the need or the importance of self-reflection and ownership and agency over your own career, the creation of your own career. And it's very empowering. I'm not a fan of the word empower, but I love this idea of it being self-empowering, of really saying, I can take agency over it. I can act in a way that serves me. And I know also that it'll lift up the world. So the courage, Suzanne, then is taking that first step of saying, I've identified what I want. I've identified that you might be somebody who can help me get to what I want, and then asking for it.
Do you think it's also about us coming to terms with the fact of we have to ask somebody else, we have to enlist somebody else to actually make it happen?
100%. 100%. It's, while I do believe that everything is figure outable, everything is not figure outable on your own. Right. And so you've got to be able to identify that you need for help, recognizing really truly that it's a strength. I can't think of a single time in the course of my 30-year career where somebody asked me for assistance and I viewed it as a sign of weakness. I always really admire somebody who's like, you know what, I'm graduating. I would love to learn more about this. Or I see you've done this. Can you tell me a little bit about that? I love that curiosity. And I actually find it a gift to me as well.
I so agree. And it is that gift of somebody bringing to you also the reflection point of what can I share, but then also how can I use this as an opportunity for me to think about maybe where I have the opportunity to grow right now.
100%.
One of the quotes from your TEDx talk that I love is impact isn't built alone. Yeah. And that's one of the things that really resonated for me on how important community is. I mean, not just for, mental health and for all of these things overall and for our career, but just the idea of how vital it is for us to be reaching out to people and to understand that we always have an opportunity to develop. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think we tend to believe our own stories in our head. And the more that we isolate ourselves, or even the more we just put our nose down and just keep, pushing ahead, which is, there, I was raised in a time and in the belief that was something that's virtuous. And I do think there's something about just being doggedly determined that I find really, really admirable. But you also can be your own worst enemy by just trying to slog through and do it yourself. And we tend to drink our own Kool-Aid and believe our own stories. And it's not until we connect with other people and we learn the skill and the art of creating a safe space where somebody can point out a differing perspective or share where you may be missing something or give you feedback on a shortcoming, or even on a strength, that helps us reframe our thinking and connect the dots to new possibilities. I think the more we connect with one another, I don't even think it, I know the more we connect with one another, the more innovative we can become and the greater the impact that we can build. Because impact is viral, right? When you start to make a difference, you start to learn more about how you can make a difference, and people start spreading the word about the way you can make a difference. And it's not about renown. It's really about effect on people it's a multiplier effect.
So much so. And I love that you brought multipliers in. It's actually one of my favorite Liz Wiseman books. I love the
Yes.
whole idea of how do we really not build empires, but how do we realize where we're accidentally diminishing people, and how do we really help them to be more talented? And in the process, so are we.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another Liz Wiseman concept that I think builds into that really nicely is this concept of native genius, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we all have something. I was just talking to a client about this morning, is that we all have something that we are naturally great at, that lights us up, that just feels so easy and seamless, and we wonder, how could anybody really even find value when it's this easy for me? And yet I get so much love and life out of it. And I think part of the connection piece is it helps us shed light on where our native geniuses are as well, and really draw from what it is that we really are just so naturally great at, that lights us up and helps us shine. There's an element about connecting with others that helps us see ourselves better too.
Yes, and it unlocks new perspectives, and that's another thing
Mm-hmm.
that I so appreciate. And I I learned that early on. I mean, I'm very grateful to my parents for helping to, I remember talking to my mom at some point and saying like, "Oh, I think this person might think this." She's like, "Well, why don't you just ask them?" Why don't you just sort of
Yeah.
muster up the courage to ask them the question and see how they feel, instead of creating the story for them? Because as you
Mm-hmm.
said, we do that for ourselves. And that's one of the things that I've learned is nothing is worse for going to get feedback from somebody or going to get perspective. I can either absorb it, take it in some way, learn from it, or not, but at least it opens up the crack a little bit for something else.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting about that too, Suzanne, is I think it helps underscore the importance of learning how to build trust in relationships, so that you can ask for and be bold enough to be able to make a request that might seem like an imposition, and be given the benefit of the doubt that it's for the purpose of learning or the purpose of growth as well, right? Part of the problem, I think, the reason that feedback gets such a bad rap, is because people give it in a vacuum without this underlying trust and safety, without creating a safe space. And one of the things that I love about developmental relationships is, because you have this construct of it being a learning relationship and you have intentionality around it, it it paves the way for that kind of open interchange of, I want to ask you directly about what I'm thinking. I'm worried what you might think about it, but we've already set the ground rule that this is a relationship about learning. So I know you're going to give me some grace or get curious about why I've asked, as opposed to just shut me out.
Mm, yeah, I love that. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
You're also making me think about the current state that we're in. We have a lot of people that are looking for work that have been laid off. I have a lot of close friends and clients who have lost their jobs, who are middle-aged, and it's a real challenge for them to be networking right now and to get out there and to be cultivating these relationships. Any advice that you would give to these people right now?
Yeah, I mean, the first is to recognize that you have something to give also, right? That it is that mutuality. I think that's the first piece. Um, and the second piece is that, these relationships don't always start as an ask. They always start as a connect, right? So I'm a big fan of, like, creating developmental relationships out of relationships that start elsewhere. Like, that's how you get to know people and where their strength is and what you might learn from them. It's not from their LinkedIn profile. That can be a nice clue, but truly, like, whether we're compatible from a learning perspective, whether there's something I want to learn from you, whether I view you as a safe space to share, is in the relationships that I currently have. So to your question, I think my advice is, think about the network that you have, and use that as a springboard for the network that you want, right? What is it that you think you want to learn? Who might be able to help you there? And I would also, like, the times when I have kind of been in a transition, thinking about where I want to grow outside of the professional context has always helped me to grow within the professional context, right? I want to learn to paint, or I want to learn to speak Spanish, or I want to learn something else that's not related to my what I do for a living, and creating relationships in there always end up generative in the other areas as well. It's just this exponential effect of connecting in general. We need people. The more we want to retreat in those times where it's like, I'm kind of embarrassed that I'm in between, or I don't know what I want, or I'd rather just stay home and work on my resume. I don't think working on your resume is the cure for that time. I think it's an important thing to do, but I think it can end up being busy work or a tool for procrastination from actual work of connecting and discovery.
Yes, and I think it's even more important now after the pandemic when so many of us have been isolated and haven't been connecting with as many people by
Mm-hmm.
design. And
Mm-hmm.
that's been a hard muscle for a lot of people to bring back.
Yeah, I think the pandemic was this like great breaking of our society of figuring out what we really need in terms of connectivity. And the Surgeon General said, I think it was in 2022 or 2023, the US Surgeon General said we have this epidemic of loneliness here in the States. And I think there's evidence of that, globally as well, that despite all this virtual connection, there is such a sense of disconnection. And the pandemic just heightened that so much, right? But it
Yeah.
also made us realize, at least it made me realize, how much I really do need other people for this sense of growth. And in that way, I mean, there was kind of a beauty in it of reaching out of necessity rather than just out of convenience, of helping to affirm the importance of intentionality in the design of your own community.
And talk to me about where mentoring comes into this, because I think that mentoring is one of those words that people have such associations with and label it in different ways. I'm curious how you define it and how you actually massage that and bring that into your larger work.
Yeah. The easiest way that I can kind of distinguish and define mentoring is thinking about it in terms of three characteristics. First and foremost, mentoring is a learning relationship. Learning is the purpose, the process, and the product of mentoring. That was something that the founder of my organization said over and over again. Learning is the purpose, the process, and the product of mentoring. Without learning, your conversations are a really nice lunch, really fun happy hour, right? Or a great coffee date. And that's it. And that there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not mentoring. Learning, it's for the sake of learning. So that's thing one. Thing two is this concept of reciprocity that we've already discussed, right? We know intuitively that mentors give and mentees get, but also it's true that mentees give and mentors get, and the data shows that, exponentially mentors become better leaders, they increase their cultural competency skills, they get greater career satisfaction. It's not just this good feeling about giving back. There's a lot that improves as a result of that. So we've got learning, we've got reciprocity. And the third element is co-creation, is this idea that in an effective mentoring relationship, the mentor and the mentee are co-creating the terms of the mentoring relationship. I call it the funny math of mentoring, where 1 + 1 = 3. You got the mentor and the mentee, and then you've got this relationship that they co-create together. And it's really a beautiful thing. And it's all in service of the development of a mentor's skills, knowledge, or ability. So that's mentoring. And that's a way to help us think about it as different from coaching or sponsoring or managing or training. And we can dive more into those distinctions if you find that useful. But, mentoring fitting into this mentoring is one form of a developmental relationship. And as I said, I think before, it can happen in moments, it can happen in conversations, it can happen in longer term relationships as well. But it's, centered around kind of mutually defined goals for the development of a mentee's skills, knowledge, or ability. And traditionally, we obviously think about one-on-one hierarchical relationships, right? Where somebody more senior mentors somebody more junior. But the beauty of developmental networks, and when you think about mentoring in that context, is you can think about peer mentoring relationships, again, one-on-one or in groups, or you can think about what we call complementary mentoring, some call reverse mentoring, where somebody more junior is mentoring somebody more senior. All of these pieces help you think through that. You can think of a kind of a board of advisors, right? Where there's kind of more advisory relationships as well. So there's lots of different ways to be thinking about mentoring in the context of developmental networks. And thinking about it as something that's developmental really helps you crystallize on the purpose of it and to set some structures that help make that much more easy and effective.
I love that. Well, and I have sadly seen so many mentor relationships fail. And I'm curious to hear from you. I have my own ideas of this and some of my own perspectives on it. What are the things that you think damage or potentially threaten mentoring relationships?
Yeah, well, the first is that, when I think about it in an organizational context, so often organizational mentoring programs fail because they're just what I call pair and pray, meaning like they pair people and then they kind of pray that it succeeds. Go forth and mentor,
Yes.
as if by virtue of living the life that you've led, without any like training, without any understanding really of what effective mentoring is, you can then become a good mentor. I'm a great leader, so I can be a great mentor. Well, there are a lot of great leaders who are not necessarily great mentors. So without that capacity building, a lot of times, or capability building, excuse me, a lot of times mentoring programs will fail. So that's kind of thing one. Um, the other is lack of structure. I am somebody who, in most of my relationships, I like to wing it. I'm not, I'm a very prepared person, but in my friendships and all of those, like, I just kind of, I don't know how things are going to go. I just want to be present, and I want to be present for you, and I want to wing it. Well, it turns out in mentoring, you got to have some loose structure so that when you wing it, you're still having a developmental conversation. And so failing to embrace that structure where you really are taking the time and intentionally co-creating the terms of your agreement, the terms, co-creating the terms of your relationship is another place where I see it. I see it fizzle. And then the other is when a mentee doesn't drive their own learning, right?
Yeah.
What we know about effective mentoring is that mentors set the tone, but mentees drive the learning. And so if you are not, as a mentor, taking ownership of your own learning, as a mentee, taking ownership of your own learning, no mentor wants to chase you down and make sure that you are investing in your own learning. So really taking the time for preparation and follow up and follow through is another ingredient of a successful mentoring relationship.
Thank you for that. And I
Yeah.
think you hit the nail on the head. And it's similar to what you were saying before, like, okay, if you don't have some sort of structure or learning in it, then it's just hanging out, right? That you don't actually
Exactly.
have the learning built in. And that's one of the things that I have seen is that sometimes people are like, oh, I want to be mentored, but I don't know what I really need to be mentored on.
Mhm.
And that so of course the mentor is very unclear on, well, exactly what do you need to get out of this? What are your goals? What are you working towards? That's where I've seen a lot of things not necessarily work. I've also seen, and this is one that I've seen happen very regularly also in entrepreneurial circles, is the brain picking. People that call up and say, or
Yeah.
send you I'd love to pick your brain. I'd love to learn from everything that you've learned in starting your business or growing your business over the past few years. And I'm curious for you, as you shift it to more of that lens, I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. We use it as a shortcut question to ask somebody for their time. And I think we do ourselves a disservice, excuse me. We do ourselves a disservice when we use that terminology because, like, I got a lot in my brain, as do you, as does everybody. That's not and I need to know what it is you want to learn. And if you're just coming to pick my brain, it means you have not done the initial self-reflection to really pinpoint what it is you want to learn. If you call me up and you say, I'd love to get, I see you have done X, Y, and Z, right? I'd love to get I'm interested in this as well. Here's where I'm struggling. I'd love to get your thoughts on how I might position myself. I'll have that conversation every day with you because I know you've had the time for self-reflection. If it's just like, I want to, be where you are, or I want to do what you've been doing, can I pick your brain? It feels exploitative,
Yes.
right? And it's not in the spirit of sharing. That's in the spirit of taking. And just the phrase itself, I think is problematic. One thing, as I'm talking to you, Suzanne, a coach, who, is focused on courage, it occurs to me that maybe one piece I missed when we talked about the definition and the developmental relationships is kind of the coaching piece and how it all fits together. So is it okay if I just go down that?
Please.
Yeah. So, I think one thing, if people who are listening to this say, like, yeah, but I don't know where I want to go, I don't know what to be self-reflective on. This is where you can use the coaching relationship to help think through what you might work on with your mentor. Where is it you want to grow? I mean, a great coach, and you know this better than anybody, a great coach will help somebody think through where the areas for expansiveness and expansion are, the paths that they might want to choose. And I've had some mentees come to me after working with a coach and saying, like, I've had some time to think through and I want to learn about this, can I talk to you about that? I love that because it shows a sense of willingness to be vulnerable, how you want to show up, and a real intentionality around engaging in a particular mentoring relationship. I think it is about having this kitchen cabinet, right, that can help you in various ways to think and grow. as well.
Thank you for mentioning that. And
Yeah.
yes, kitchen cabinet is actually one of my favorite phrases because it is that idea of who are the people that are going to challenge you. And I feel that in our lives overall, that is one of the most important roles that anybody can play for you. How can
Hmm.
people compassionately challenge you, not just as a coach? I mean, coaching is a wonderful thing.
Hmm.
And you've probably had this happen too as a coach, is that sometimes you find yourself falling into more coaching relationships in your personal life than maybe you want. Maybe
Yeah.
sometimes you're like, okay, that's not why I'm here.
Yeah.
But there is so much value in being open to that. And that I think is one of the challenges that as we get older, we tend to almost calcify into
Yeah.
this is the way, this is what I know that has worked for me so far. And we're not necessarily open to those additional perspectives. And that I find challenging.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. I'm curious for you. I'd love to hear about a mentoring relationship that was really important to you, where you were either the mentee or the mentor. Would you be willing to share that?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm so fortunate that I have so many to choose from. And part of it is, I think, because obviously the work that I do, I'm attuned to it. But even before I was doing this work, my first job out of grad school, I was a lawyer, and I went into a law firm, and um, I was a decent enough attorney. Um, wasn't my sole work, but I was decent enough at it, and our law firm did something super innovative at the time, which was that it developed a training division essentially. So instead of just the traditional practice of law of counseling and litigation, I was in doing employment law. The firm decided to bring in somebody who was kind of like a master facilitator to do compliance training. And at the time it was diversity training and a whole bunch of other things. And she needed some young associate blood to help staff her endeavor. And she kind of, tapped me on the shoulder. I'd never really done training and facilitation before. I was on the mock trial team. I was about the end of it and a little bit of litigation, but I'd never really been in front of a group and done that kind of facilitation and training before. And so I was kind of like, why me? And I turns out I loved it. And um, initially, she was incredibly dynamic. Her name was Mindy Chapman. She's sadly since passed, but she was a force. She was just had a real presence and an incredible vision, and was a total firecracker. I adored her, and I would shadow her to learn, some of the programs that she had done. And I remember kind of trying to emulate her. And I can't remember exactly what her words were, Suzanne, but the message was, that ain't going to work for you. Like, it works for me. It doesn't work for you. You're not me. Go find your own voice. And it was this combination of recognizing that this might be something that I was good at, and that it was really important to discover who I am and who I wanted to be in front of a group for the effectiveness of my facilitation. That was really, really transformative for me. I mean, this is what I do now on a daily basis, is I facilitate learning for other people. And I think in a large part because of lessons that she gave me. And the other is, I lead Center for Mentoring Excellence, which is an organization that was founded by my mother. And she actually started the business after I'd left for high school. So I didn't really grow up in her house knowing that she did this. I'm sure many of your listeners, and maybe you can relate to the fact that from like college through those early 20 years, you're paying attention just to yourself, not to what your parents are doing.
Pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. So it wasn't until my, frontal cortex was totally developed that I actually had some EQ to recognize that the people I love the most were doing things of value. But when we decided to work together, I was really, really nervous. Like, here we are in the mentoring business, but I didn't know how it was going to be to work with my mother.
Yeah.
I knew she mentored others. I knew she was great at what she did, but I didn't know how that was going to translate into what I did. And it turned out that she walked the talk enormously. Like, she really valued what I brought and helped complement with what she brought. And we learned from each other on a day-to-day basis. And she had this really unique ability to be able to create a space where we could give each other feedback in a way that wasn't, I mean, look, we could also be a little snarky and short with one another, as mothers and daughters sometimes can. And it was kind of a safe space, but also really having constructive feedback. And she taught me so much, not just about how to run this business, but about how to develop where I'm strong and to draw on the work that she had done. That is really I can't imagine a bigger gift. So another really influential and important mentoring relationship for me.
Wow, two amazing relationships, and how beautiful that it was your mom.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Do you remember making the decision to join the business and start partnering with your mom? And was that hard for you to
Well,
make
there's,
the change and it
yeah,
being with your mom?
in so many different ways. First of all, as I mentioned, I'm a lawyer, so I am trained to be risk averse. And I have had a job in some capacity since I was 13 years old.
Wow.
And when I was in my early 40s, when thinking time, yes, I was in my early 40s when we decided to work together. And um, I had never had a job that didn't have a salary.
Mm.
And I was also kind of exploring another corporate path. I'll tell you a really interesting, at least interesting to me, story. You can tell me whether it's interesting to you. But I was sure that I was going to be leaving the corporate job that I was in, and just for a whole variety of factors, it was winding down. And the decision was, do I stay in the corporate world, or do I, give this coaching thing and this work with my mom a real go? And as you know, there's no certainty in income in either of those paths, and there's the other
Mhm.
one. So I was interviewing for a job that I had thought probably a few years ago would have been my dream job. It was to lead DEI for a big company that I had long admired, and I was kind of in the final stages of the interview process. And I knew that if I was gonna go the other path, it wasn't fair to stay on that interview path. There were other candidates, and the gracious thing was either pull out now or stay in it, and I'm in it. So I had made the very uncharacteristic of me decision to go the more riskier path. And I was I went out for a walk. Took my dog for a walk, and on the corner of my block is a family that's a Hindu family that they never have their blinds open, but that one day they had their blinds open, and I noticed this beautiful statue of Ganesha. So it was. I didn't actually know what the name was, but it was this beautiful elephant. Clearly a Hindu god with 6 arms. I'm sure you've seen it, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful adornment. It really caught my eye, and I couldn't figure out why it caught my eye. I was walking my dog. I'd been past that in that path hundreds and hundreds of times, a couple times a day, and never noticed it before. And I couldn't stop. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about this statue. I was like, I think, I Googled elephant Hindu statue, and it's Ganesha. I was like, okay, what's the significance of Ganesha? The significance of Ganesha is the goddess of the right path or the right choice or something like that. And,
Wow.
um, you know, I, that sort of alternative universe thinking is not something that was ever comfortable for me, but I literally couldn't get it out of my head. And to me, it was just the sign that, okay, this will either work or it won't work and I'll find another job. But, I went, so as soon as I did that, I called the company and I pulled out of the interview process, and I said, we're going to give it a go. And I knew pretty soon into it that it was something that was going to work. And that was super gratifying.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing it. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean the symbolism of that's yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And look what happened.
Look what happened. Here we are.
Well, and you're also making me think about courage coming into that with making that change and doing it in a way. I mean, it's vulnerable to go out on your own, especially when you are trained to not be risk averse. But I would just imagine that doing it in general, and then doing it with your mother, and otherwise, there's a lot of layers there. So good on you
Yeah.
for actually taking the leap.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. There's been two major pivots in my professional career. One was not stop to practice law and going into the DEI kind of HR realm. And the other was not quitting my JOB for my other JOB, my non-JOB. And I have to say that both of them hurt. Like both those decisions hurt. It was like I could physically feel the discomfort of both of those, and I think that those are probably the two most rewarding professional decisions I've made. Full stop.
Mm, full stop.
Yeah.
Very nice. You're also reminding me of when I quit my job and the other people that were freaking out that I told in my life. And it was not so much that they didn't have faith in me, but it was because the idea of them doing that terrified them.
Oh my gosh, so much. so much, right? Like I couldn't possibly do this. But it's so funny because on the back end of it, those are the same people who find it inspiring, right?
Yes.
You know? So it's a good reminder that people's reactions are more about them than they are about you
Yes.
most of the time, right? So I think about it. I told you those are kind of the two most courageous professional decisions, but the most courageous personal decision that I've ever made is to move. We started our family in Chicago, and we lived in Chicago for 17 years, and our kids were 10 and 7 when we decided to move out here to Seattle, where I live now. And there were a lot of friends who were like, "What are you doing? You got a job, you got a community, life is pretty good to you. Like you searching for Shangri-La, it just doesn't exist. And then again, now here we are 10 years into our move here, and it is exactly the same. I was just reached out to by the one friend who was the most nervous for me about the move. It was like, we're thinking of moving. And this was really inspirational to us. So it's funny how that all comes back, right?
Yes, the people that you inspire, that you inspire, whereas other ones maybe you did, but you're not necessarily aware of that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're reminding me of a past guest on the show who's been Kate Eisler, and Kate has a saying, "What if it all works out?"
What if it all works out? Yeah. Yeah. Well,
And I
she's
love that.
somebody who's
And
taken lots of risks in her life and, has created amazing things.
yes, and I think there has to be that certain, like when you leap, there has to be some level, as you said, like, okay, so what's the worst thing that can happen here? What's the best thing? What's the worst thing? And okay, so I'll get another job at some point. Oh, or I'll move back. I'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like that point of no return.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And I'd love to ask you a little bit more about identity, because I do believe that identity plays a big role in this. If you're a mentee, if you're a mentor, if you're in some learning relationship or developmental relationship, where do you see identity potentially getting in the way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Identity is a lens, right? So, and I think one of the fallacies is that we have one primary identity. We are all kind of a function of multiple identities, which is a product of our upbringing, a product of our experience, a product of the choices that we've made. And this just the concept of identity highlights the importance of self-reflection and self-awareness, right? And vulnerability as well, right? Of recognizing that your truth comes from your own lens. It comes from the experiences that you've had, and we tend to assume that that's universal, and the fallacy of like I call it the one mentor myth, right? Of that there's one mentor who lived this path that we can learn from, and we can sit at their, the Yoda. There is no Yoda is a fictional character. We cannot sit at the feet of anybody and just digest what it is they have to give us and then live that path. If we don't take the time and think about the way our identity impacts us, and if our mentors are not aware of the way that their own identity shaped their own path, then you're going to end up with these mentoring conversations that are not truly resonant or authentic, and it begs the question of like, so what should a mentor do about all of this, right? Like, how can a mentor encourage, the authentic learning and sharing that takes into account the identity of their mentee? And part of that is to create the space to truly connect and learn from one another and ask questions, to test things out. Example, mentoring is a great place to share your wisdom and to share your experience. But I tell mentors, if you're going to share your wisdom and share your experience, make sure it ends with a question mark and not with a period. Here's how this was for me. Here's the path I took. Here are the choices that I made. Now, Suzanne, how might that land for you? How might that be different for you? How do you see that working? What do you see the obstacles as being for you? Because even if you tried to replicate my journey, it would be different.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're also making me think about sometimes it can be very myopic, right? The idea of like, well, this is what I would do instead of directing. How do you potentially advise and give perspective as opposed to just telling somebody exactly what to do? And that reminds me of your original mentor saying, like, you got to find your way.
Yes.
This is my way. You don't just want to imitate this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to round out the conversation with talking about your TEDx talk. You want to give a little preview of what that is for our listeners?
Yeah. I as somebody who has spent so much time thinking about mentoring programs in organizations, which I still think are really, really critical, my thinking has really begun to shift the more I have explored the work of some of my colleagues. I mentioned a couple of them, Kathy Cram and Monica Higgins before, on strategic networks and all those things. Um, and I started to think about the people who I've met or the organizations that I've worked with that have seen these successful cultures, what's been present. And it's really two things. It's organizational action and individual agency and accountability, right? So if you just have organizational action, but no individual agency and accountability, you're going to have one form of learning, right? You're going to, maybe you'll just have a pair and pray, but you have one structure, and it feels foisted upon people. It feels mandated upon people, and it just becomes, one avenue of learning. It's really, really important to have that organizational action because you create space, you create competency, and all of that. But without the individual agency and accountability, people are left waiting for their employer to shape their growth. And often it's just growth in a professional context. You and I both know from the work that we do that people are much more whole than just what they do at work. If you just have individual agency and accountability, you don't start to create you don't have cultures that fuel and grow from the learning, right? It doesn't become part of what leadership does. It doesn't become part of what's rewarded in an organization. So I was thinking about developmental networks in that context. And I realized that when organizations are looking to create an impact or create a mentoring culture and individuals are looking to learn and grow, it really is those two things that come together. And developmental networks to me really are the key to that. How can we equip organizations with the ability to create these structures for mentoring and the space for mentoring, and equip individuals to have that self-reflection and to think about multiple learning modalities and to identify and ask for what they need in various shapes. So that's what my TEDx is about. It's properly called Want to Make a Bigger Impact, Build Better Connections, but on the TEDx has renamed it on the power of intentional connections in your careers. And I think both are apt and useful titles for thinking about that concept.
Yes, very much so. And I like how you're talking about how you've shifted your thinking over time, because it really, and to your point as well, how do we also support organizations to help to have these relationships and to help open up this learning without it being so prescriptive?
Exactly.
Yeah. So good. I'm so grateful that you do this work. I'm so grateful that I got to have this conversation with you and that we got to know each other better in the process. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me of the importance that, I always say work in progress, never done. I never want to be done because then how boring is that? But the idea of what else might I learn and who can I learn it from? How could I give myself the opportunity to reach out to somebody in a different capacity and to just see what's possible? So thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. I love that, Suzanne. That's great feedback for me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Any final thoughts before I bid you adieu?
Just kind of this imperative of always always learning, having the intentionality to learn in multiple ways. It's how we keep growing. It's how we, get satisfaction from what we do. And it's how we connect. It's how we leverage our connections with others in a way that's really mutually beneficial, and how we can give back in a way we're not even conscious of. So I'm just encouraging the people who are listening and watching to really embrace that.
I love that. Yeah. How can we actually get more curious on our own and inspire ourselves maybe to be inspired by other people?
Yeah. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Lisa. Such a wonderful conversation. I appreciate you. Everybody listening, we will have Lisa's website and all of her information, including that TED Talk, in the show notes so you can reach out to her and learn more. So thank you again, Lisa, for being here. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Stay courageous. The Courage Effect is brought to you by Weller Collaboration. If you're looking for a leadership coach, maybe a speaker or a consultant to help you or your team be more courageous and adaptable, we would love to have a conversation. More information is available via the links in our show notes. Please spread the word about the Courage Effect. You taking a few minutes to rate or review your favorite episodes or share them with people in your universe makes a big difference. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. For more information about the show, me, our amazing guests, or you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, please contact us via our website at thecourageeffect.com. It takes a village to bring this show to you. I want to thank Alex Dandyforth for her production and administrative superpowers, Dave Nelson for composing our theme music, and I am your host, Suzanne Weller. Thank you again for listening.